Right.
Mm-hmm. Now, the promoter also is going to deal with venues. You mentioned the Hammerstein Ballroom.
Right.
I mean, there's venues like Madison Square Garden.
Right.
Talk about what goes on during those negotiations.
Right. Again, with there are a number of different types of deals. Depending on the value of the fight and how big the fight is. For big championship fights, venues are generally willing to pay what's called a site fee, where they're going to pay the promoter money to bring that fight to their venue. And of late, Vegas casinos, Atlantic City casinos have come up with the most money for those fights because they don't necessarily have to depend on the gate, the tickets sold, to recoup their money. People just walking through the casino, just people who follow boxing tend to like to gamble. So casinos like bringing boxing events to their venue because people will gamble and they're going to make money both on the gate and what's called the drop, which is what people are dropping at the casino. So for the big time fights, that's generally what happens. There's a site fee that goes from the venue to the promoter. For the smaller fights, like at the Hammerstein, it's what's called a four-wall deal where the promoter pretty much pays to rent the building out. Maybe 20, 25,000, something like that for the Hammerstein. And you're paying not just to rent the building, but also for the union crew to tear up and tear down the event. So in that case, it's not going to be a big money proposition because you're going to have to recoup with ticket sales and sponsorships. And generally with the Hammerstein, it's a small venue, so you're not going to have big names fighting there. You're going to have guys on the way up or guys on the way down. So they're not big money-making ventures, but they're necessary to keep fighters busy and to try and build them up to that HBO level.
And let's talk about the hearing process. Sometimes a fight will occur. There's a decision that's disputed. Something happens during the fight, and one of the fighters wants to protest it. What happens during that hearing process? I know there's different types of hearings. Sometimes it can be done on paper, for example. Other times there's actually a formal hearing. Could you discuss the different types of hearing processes? And in fact, you've been through a couple of hearings yourself, so maybe you want to talk about those as well.
Right. Generally, state athletic commissions will allow you to protest if you think that a rule or reg has been violated during a fight. Let's say, generally fighters just get mad. If there's a bad decision that went down, then they're going to protest it. Those are generally not successful because it's discretionary. Judging in boxing is very subjective, and unless it's just so egregious that they'll overturn it, it's very, very rare that a decision of the judges will be overturned. Oftentimes, decisions of referees, if they misinterpret rules, those are more overturnable. But even that, it's a very low success rate. But the commissions will allow you to generally have a hearing before the commission if you insist on it to argue, to make your argument to overturn the decisions. I had one in Atlantic City where at the New Jersey State Athletic Commission, it involved the undisputed welterweight championship of the world. Corey Spinks had beaten Ricardo Mayorga for the title, but during the course of the fight, Corey had slipped a number of times, and Mayorga's camp had felt that they were knockdowns and that the referee had made an incorrect call on those knockdowns. But the commission, Larry Hazard is one of the commissioners, and he was a very good referee in the 80s. And he was at ringside for the fight. He saw a tape of the fight. He sat through the hearing, and he was unmoved by their arguments. But yeah, you can have a hearing where it's in front of a commission where each side is fairly informal. You present your arguments, opening statement. You might have a witness or two, and let the commission decide on on the rules and regs whether which side is correct. There's also ones where if it's something that you don't need a videotape and witnesses, you can just kind of write your arguments and the commission will decide it just on the papers. And I've had a few of those as well. But pretty much every commission will allow you to protest, if a fighter has a protest about a fight, or some Some commissions also will preside over contract disputes, not all, and it depends on the type of contract that's at issue. Fighter manager contracts, fighter promoter contracts, if they're done generally on a form contract that gives the commission jurisdiction over the contract, then the disputes can be decided in an arbitration hearing before the commission.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned potential litigation issues between the promoters and the fighters, for example. Why don't you discuss certain types of litigation scenarios? Also, another one that often occurs is issues between the fighters and the sanctioning bodies. So discuss various litigation scenarios that might be common in boxing and how and when they arise and usually what happens.
Right. I mean, you know, it's funny. It's like the Hobbesian paradigm, you know. I mean, you have, you know, man in the state of nature, and then there's the social contract of, you know, a more organized, civilized society. The other big sports, football, baseball, basketball, they're in that civilized society where you've got a collective bargaining agreement, you've got unions. When there are disputes, they go right to arbitration, or, I mean, it's a very organized process. Boxing is in the state of nature. It's more like the Wild West. I mean, there's no unions, there's no collective bargaining agreement between promoters and fighters. So any dispute, you know, if it can't be solved at a commission hearing, you're going to end up in civil court. And this often happens between promoters and fighters because just the natures of the contracts between promoters and fighters. The promoter has a lot of obligations, has to get him a minimum number of fights, you know, pay him minimum purses, you know, and generally they have these fighters locked up for 3 to 5 years. So a lot of the issues that come up are just contract issues. Where, you know, they haven't been paid enough money, they haven't gotten enough fights, the promoter's preventing them from fighting a certain fighter because it's not in his best interest, and it's harder on the fighter side because generally fighters don't have the money. You know, I mean, litigation is time-consuming, it costs money. Generally, if it goes to court and a promoter can wait a fighter out, they have an advantage in that. Any number of litigation issues, mainly breach of contract, though. So,
now, something that you have discussed throughout your dealings in boxing is a possible national governing body which will administrate the rules of boxing across the states. Give us your opinions on that, and do you think it'll come to fruition?
I mean, they've been trying to get a bill for a national commission to, you know, clean up boxing since the 50s, at least. And it's the likelihood of it. I mean, our government has much bigger priorities than legislating the sport of boxing, and that's generally what it comes down to. Because people within the sport can't seem to get together to regulate it and have a civilized and unionized sport like the major sports, it seems like the only way we're going to have something akin to a major sport is to have a national commission that can regulate promoters and sanctioning bodies, because oftentimes, you know, the only way that these bodies or promoters can be regulated is if a fighter takes them to court, and it's just so inefficient. The way, you know, to give a national commission power to license promoters and sanctioning bodies, and if they are not, living by the regulations or the federal law, to revoke that license, I think that would be a huge step forward in boxing, and certainly it would help with a lot of the corruption issues and the cozy relationship that some promoters have with these organizations, where their fighters get rated, you know, and are undeserving and unjust ratings. I think it would go a long way towards that. But do I see it happening? It's you know, I mean, McCain just tried to push through a big bill and it died, you know. So I don't see it happening anytime in the near future.
I wanted to go back for a moment to alternative dispute resolution. This is something that has really evolved in the law over the past, I don't know, let's say generation and a half.
Right.
And it's starting to take hold in boxing.
Right.
You had mentioned at the commission level, where if the parties sign a contract that permits the commission to arbitrate a situation, the commission will step in and do it.
Right.
But is there any other scenarios where ADR, and specifically arbitration, will play a role in these relationships?
It really depends. I mean, because everything is driven by the contracts that the fighters make. If it's provided for in a promotional contract, I mean, you'd have to negotiate for it. Otherwise, you're gonna have to go to civil court, and it's going to take a long time. It would be, again, a federal commission. One of the purposes it could serve would be to be able to resolve these problems between fighters and promoters and sanctioning bodies in arbitration, in a proceeding that is not going to take years to get resolved, that can be done in, at most, a couple of weeks' time. That would be ideal. In ADR, for the most part, at the commission level, to me, is very efficient. It's very helpful to be able to just go to a commission, have them, resolve the differences in a relatively informal proceeding in a fairly quick, amount of time. I'm all for arbitration as opposed to civil litigation. I mean, it's just really time-consuming with civil litigation, very expensive, and it's just, for fighters, it's really they're up against it. I mean, promoters generally have more money. They have attorneys who've done work before them before, and it's for the fighters' sake, let's hope we see more ADR.
Kurt, I want to thank you very much for your time and for appearing on the program.
Well, thanks for having me.
Kurt Emhoff can be contacted through his website at www.emhoff-law.com or by email at kurt.emhoff@emhoff-law.com. I'm Ron Zaslow. Have a good evening, Manhattan.